Chapter 31, My Forging is No Weaker Than Others. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Before Zhu Chuanfeng could finish his sentence, Xiao Zongshui's and the others' expressions changed. Their initial plan was not to do this. Develop a new standard weapon? They didn't know if Joshu could do it, but the forging apprentices under them definitely couldn't. What a joke. If their forging apprentices could develop new standard weapons, why would they fight with Joshu? They were jealous of Joshu reaching the heavens in a single bound. But ultimately, they were coveting the secret forging formula of the 100 Refinements Ring Pommel Saber. After all, the Huben Saber had already been taken over by the Huben troops, so the benefits were limited. But the 100 Refinements Ring Pommel Saber could be supplied to the entire country protector army? Because of Zhu Chuanfeng, it was almost impossible for them to win. What? Are you all questioning my decision? Zhu Chuanfeng said coldly. Xiao Zongshui cupped his hands and said with a bitter smile, Grandmaster Zhu, if neither side can forge a new standard weapon, what should we do to determine who wins and who loses? If nobody can forge one, then consider it my loss, Joshu said before Zhu Chuanfeng could say anything. However, Grandmaster Zhu, Superintendent Xiao and the others do not know this, but you are an expert. You should know that it is not easy to develop a new standard weapon. It will not be accomplished in a few hours. Even having a few days is still a little tight. Therefore, should we not extend the time for this competition? Joshu had been worried that he wouldn't be able to find an opportunity to stall for time, but now, he had been given an excuse. I naturally know this. Zhu Chuanfeng nodded. Forging a weapon was not as simple as hammering metals. It was normal to spend even several years developing a new weapon. Right now, it was just a competition, and there weren't many requirements. Even so, developing a new weapon wasn't something doable in a short period. But since this is a competition, it cannot be delayed indefinitely. The limit is 10 days. Do you have any objections? 10 days. Joshu calculated in his heart. In 10 days, he should be able to complete the limit of the 100 Refinements Ring Pommel Saber. Alright, 10 days is the limit then. Shu said. Seeing that Joshu and Grandmaster Zhu had settled the matter, Xiao Zongshui and Li Hongyuan felt bitter. However, they didn't have the courage to refute Grandmaster Zhu directly. Zhu Chuanfeng stared at Joshu and said coldly, this competition is between you guys. To prevent all of you from seeking help from outsiders, nobody is to leave this place for the next 10 days. Do you have any problems? The older, the wiser. Xiao Zongshui and the rest thought. They hadn't thought of this just now. That's right. They could ask for external help, right? Xiao Zongshui's eyes lit up. He had already come up with a series of plans. He wanted to find a way to develop a new standard weapon. Whether it was good or bad, this wasn't important. Then he would pass the forging formula to his own apprentices. He didn't believe that Joshu, a mere forging apprentice, could develop a new standard weapon in 10 days. Therefore, as long as they could forge one, they would definitely win. Xiao Zongshui and Li Hongyuan looked at each other and saw the smile on each other's lips. They felt certain of winning. There is no problem with not leaving this place, Joshu said in a low voice. But I need enough metal materials for testing. Of course. Zhu Chuanfeng nodded. If there are no other questions, prepare the contract, Superintendent Xiao. Great. Xiao Zongshui loudly said. Once they signed in black and white, it would be useless even if Joshu wanted to go back on his word. The 100 Refinements Ring Pommel Saber would be theirs? Old Zhou, I'm here. Xiao Zongshui went to draw up the contract when the door suddenly opened and Sun Gongping rushed in. Joshu rolled his eyes. You're only here now. Don't you think you're a little late? Old Zhou, you can't blame me this time. Her Highness has gone on a mission under a decree. I can't do anything about it. Sun Gongping ignored everyone and said loudly, but don't worry, I'll hold the fort for you. I'm sure they won't dare play any tricks. Sun Gongping's gaze swept across Xiao Zongshui and the others, stopping briefly on Zhu Chuanfeng. But it was obvious that he didn't know Zhu Chuanfeng. Come to think of it, even if Sun Gongping came from an extraordinary family, he was still too young. As a grand craftsman, Zhu Chuanfeng rarely interacted with youngsters like Sun Gongping. Sun Gongping's elders might know Zhu Chuanfeng. Zhu Chuanfeng also didn't take Sun Gongping seriously. He was only a 9th-rank martial artist. In his life, Zhu Chuanfeng had seen countless ranked martial artists. Now, he would only take ranked martial artists seriously if they were at least at the 6th rank. The rest. You two stay here and watch. Don't let anyone cheat. I will return 10 days later. The contract was signed. Naturally, Zhu Chuanfeng wouldn't wait here for 10 days. He left the two boys behind to supervise and left the 78th workshop. Who is this guy? He seems awesome, Sun Gongping said unhappily as he watched Zhu Chuanfeng disappear. Grand Craftsman Zhu Chuanfeng. Joshu gave him a thumbs up. You're awesome to say that about a Grand Craftsman. What? Grand Craftsman? Sun Gongping stared at him. Why didn't you say so earlier? Grandmaster Zhu, wait for me. Sun Gongping sprang up and chased after him. Grandmaster Zhu, could you help me forge a weapon? Sun Gongping shouted while chasing after Zhu Chuanfeng. Joshu was speechless. What happened to holding the fort for me? Superintendent Zhou, the contract was witnessed by Grandmaster Zhu. It's definitely effective. Xiao Zongshui put away the contract that both parties had signed and smiled. Our competition will begin now. Didn't it start long ago? Joshu snorted. Smelting furnaces, forging hammers, metal materials, I hope you won't play any tricks. Don't worry. We aren't so despicable, Li Hongyuan said. We have enough materials. Superintendent Zhou, if you can't forge a new standard weapon by then, don't blame the 78th workshop for not providing good materials. Quoting you, I, Joshu, am not so despicable, Joshu said coldly. Haha, Li Hongyuan laughed. In that case, we won't delay you from developing your new weapon. We'll come back in 10 days. Hopefully, we'll hear good news. After he finished speaking, he, Xiao Zongshui, and the others looked at each other, and everyone laughed loudly. Laugh, laugh. I hope you can still laugh when the time comes. Joshu pursed his lips. From the corner of his eye, he saw Sun Gongping return dejectedly. Did you get snubbed? Joshu said. He knew that Zhu Chuanfeng wouldn't help Sun Gongping forge a weapon. It was obvious that Grandmaster Zhu wasn't an easy person to deal with. No matter what, he was a grand craftsman. Forging a weapon used by a mere 9th rank martial artist was not worth his time. So what if he's a grand craftsman? Sooner or later, I will become a 3rd rank grandmaster? At that time, he will have to beg me to use his weapon. Sun Gongping said unhappily. All right, you will succeed. Joshu replied perfunctorily. Although a grand craftsman was not as strong as a 3rd rank grandmaster, it was impossible for a grand craftsman to bow down to a 3rd rank grandmaster. There was a slight possibility that a grand craftsman would suck up to a 2nd rank. Being a 1st rank would increase the possibility. However, it was obvious that Sun Gongping was more rational. He didn't dream of becoming a 1st rank. Our competition will last for 10 days. Do you want to stay here? Or do you want to return after 10 days like those people? Joshu looked around. The two boys Zhu Chuanfeng had left behind obviously had no intention of talking to him. The other forging apprentices would also not talk to Joshu. They were now rivals. Sun Gongping also looked at the people around him. Am I such a disloyal person? I said I would help you hold the fort. Of course I'll stay here. If I leave, who's going to protect you? These guys don't look nice. It's not safe for you to be alone. I will reluctantly stay here for 10 days. The apprentices were angry but didn't dare to speak. But Zhu Chuanfeng's boys were not afraid of Sun Gongping and glared at him. Is it all right with the Divine Constable Bureau? Joshu asked. This was not just a day or two. This competition would last for 10 days. Joshu didn't want Sun Gongping to be punished because of him. Sun Gongping waved his hand and said casually, it's fine. I'm going out to investigate a case. It's fine if I don't go back for half a month. This works? Joshu felt a wave of envy after hearing this. He was the superintendent of a workshop, yet he couldn't have so much freedom. Is a divine constable's life so good? They didn't even have to stay in a place to work and had such a high salary. They didn't even seem busy. This job was simply too awesome. Is the Divine Constable Bureau still recruiting people? Joshu asked. What? Are you thinking of coming to the Divine Constable Bureau? No way. You should just obediently forge weapons. Our Divine Constable Bureau only wants ranked martial artists. If you go to the Divine Constable Bureau with your scrawny arms and legs, are you going to capture people, or will people capture you instead? Sun Gongping looked at Joshu with contempt. Joshu rolled his eyes. If I don't hold back, I can beat you to the ground with a single slap. How dare you look down on me? If the Divine Constable Bureau doesn't want me, I don't want to go. What's the big deal? Joshu was only asking. He was doing quite well in the forging division, and he had no intention of job hopping. Do as you please. I'm going to get to work. Joshu rolled up his sleeves. Old Joe, you've played big this time. If you lose, you have to hand over the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. Do you know the value of the secret forging formula of the 100 refinements ring pommel saber? I'm a professional. Do you think I don't know? Joshu was well aware of how profitable it was to own a patent. You know it, yet still dare to do this. Are you sure you can forge a new standard weapon? Sun Gongping said. Even if he didn't know how to forge weapons, he knew how difficult it was to develop a new standard weapon. Great Divine Constable Sun, I've just said that I'm a professional. Professionals never do anything they're unsure of. I, Joshu, am never weaker than others in forging. Chapter 32, Time to Show Real Skills. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. In the 78th workshop of the Forging Division, Superintendent Li Hongyuan's courtyard had now become the place of Joshu's competition. Ever since the competition began, Li Hongyuan, Xiao Zongshui, and the others had never shown their faces again. But Joshu knew that his every move here would be reported to them at any time. He could sense that there were no less than 5 people around the courtyard monitoring the situation. Joshu didn't care too much about this. As long as the other party didn't lack the materials he needed, they could see for all they wanted. After all, they couldn't see the legendary Armament Canon. In addition to Joshu and the group of distressed apprentices, there were also the 2 boys Zhu Chuanfang had left behind and Sun Gongping. The 3 of them were probably the most relaxed people in the courtyard. In particular, Sun Gongping treated this place like a resort. It was unknown where he had found a rocking chair. He sat not too far from Joshu's furnace. Every day, besides eating and sleeping, he would tease Zhu Chuanfang's 2 boys. His life was quite enjoyable. Joshu was the busiest of them all. He was constantly forging weapons from morning until night. Of course, what he forged was the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. The 100 refinements ring pommel sabers he had forged already filled a huge box. Sun Gongping's eyes were red with envy. Joshu even suspected that he wanted to steal the 100 refinements ring pommel sabers to exchange for money. But thinking about it, it was probably not that serious. Selling the country's strategic resources was a serious crime of treason. On the other side, the apprentices all had bitter looks on their faces. They were not constantly forging weapons like Joshu, nor were they as relaxed as Sun Gongping and the 2 boys. They felt bitter. How could they have the ability to develop new standard weapons? But if they didn't develop new weapons, after this matter blew over, their superintendents wouldn't let them off. They didn't know where to start developing. Every day, they didn't know what else to do except to comfort themselves. Old Joe, is it useful for you to forge these 100 refinements ring pommel sabers all day long? Sun Gongping opened his mouth and spat out a grape seed into a trash bin. He said lazily, I remember you guys are competing to see who can forge the better new standard weapon, right? If you don't forge a new weapon, what's the point of forging so many 100 refinements ring pommel sabers? Half of the 10 days had already passed. Sun Gongping couldn't understand why Joshu was working so hard to forge 100 refinements ring pommel sabers. If he couldn't win, he might as well admit defeat. You don't understand, Joshu said without even raising his head. As his hammer descended, another 100 refinements ring saber gradually took shape. I don't understand. Sun Gongping didn't know how many times he had heard such words. He couldn't even be bothered to retort. He was a genius martial artist, so how could he not know about weapons? As long as you're happy. What a pity, my ranked weapon, Sun Gongping said. Originally, Joshu had ownership of the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. In the future, he would become a tycoon, and Sun Gongping would also benefit a little. Unfortunately, now, if Joshu lost, the ownership of the 100 refinements ring pommel saber would change. The corners of Joshu's mouth curled up slightly. He completely ignored Sun Gongping's words. What a joke. Me losing? Ding dang? As Joshu threw the last 100 refinements ring pommel saber into the box, the legendary Armament Canon appeared in front of him. The page flipped without any wind. On the page, Of the 100 refinements ring pommel saber, the number had changed to 100. The page continued to flip. After flipping through countless pages, words and drawings began to appear on a blank page as if an invisible hand was writing something. Although this wasn't Joshu's first time seeing this scene, he was still slightly excited. As expected, after reaching the limit of the 100 refinements, ring pommel saber, the next weapon appeared in the legendary Armament Canon. With this weapon, he wanted to see how Xiao Zongshui and the others could win. With my own efforts, I finally did it. Joshu threw his hammer down and walked over to Sun Gongping. He grabbed a chair and sat down. Sun Gongping looked at him in surprise. You thought it through. Thought what through? Joshu asked. Didn't you decide to admit defeat because you felt that forging 100 refinements ring pommel sabers is useless? Sun Gongping asked. You shouldn't have said that it's considered your loss if both parties can't forge anything. Look at what's happened now. They won without doing anything. Who said I wanted to admit defeat? Joshu glanced at the forging apprentices. Someone who can make me admit defeat probably hasn't even been born yet. How arrogant. I like it. Sun Gongping burst out laughing. I'm taking a nap. Don't let anyone disturb me. Then Joshu entered Li Hongyuan's residence and found a random bed. A moment later, he fell asleep. Sun Gongping was dumbfounded. This brother of his was even more carefree than he was. They didn't notice that when the drudger delivered the food to the apprentices, he also handed them a piece of paper filled with words. For the next few days, Joshu didn't forge any more weapons. He didn't leave the residence and caught up on his sleep. On the other hand, the forging apprentices who had been slacking became diligent. Like Joshu previously, they began to forge day and night. In Sun Gongping's eyes, they were constantly trying and failing. After a few days, the pieces of metals hammered by a few apprentices had already begun to take shape. No matter how slow Sun Gongping's reaction was, he realized that something was amiss. Did these apprentices really develop a new standard weapon? Thinking of this, Sun Gongping could no longer sit still. He jumped up and somersaulted into the residence. Old Joe, don't sleep anymore. This is bad. Being woken up by Sun Gongping, Joshu was annoyed. Did the sky collapse? You're still in the mood to sleep? Your opponents are really forging a new standard weapon. Sun Gongping said loudly. I expected it, Joshu said calmly. But you still have the mood to sleep. If they succeed, you will lose. Sun Gongping said. Didn't you think I lost long ago? Joshu smiled. Indifferently. That's different. If everyone can't forge one, then it's not really considered a loss. Sun Gongping shouted. Now that the other party has forged theirs but you haven't, then you'll really lose. If you lose, Her Highness will be affected. Won't it be telling everyone that Her Highness made a mistake? Turns out you weren't worried about me. Joshu shook his head. Of course. I'm also worried about you, Sun Gongping said. When the time comes, others will also think of you as a cheat. How can you still be the superintendent of your workshop? All right, Divine Constable Sun, I appreciate your kindness. Joshu laughed. I've told you, I won't lose. However, I'm curious about Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the others are up to. Not only would Joshu not believe that the forging apprentices had developed a new standard weapon, but even the apprentices themselves also wouldn't believe it. Needless to say, Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the others must have obtained a secret weapon forging formula from somewhere and secretly sent it to these apprentices. This was their territory, and it would be as easy as slipping their hands if they wanted to do this. Joshu didn't doubt that Xiao Zongshui and the others had the ability to obtain the secret forging formula for a new standard weapon. They could even invite Grand Craftsman Zhu Chuanfeng over. Asking a forging master to help develop the secret forging formula of a new standard weapon shouldn't be a problem. In any case, they didn't require this new standard weapon to be powerful. It wasn't easy to create a weapon stronger than the Huben saber or the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. But creating a decent standard weapon wasn't too difficult for a forging master. But Joshu believed that even a forging master wouldn't be able to create a good standard weapon in a short period. It was only possible to beat Joshu if Zhu Chuanfeng personally did it. But even if Zhu Chuanfeng personally did it, it was only a possibility to win. Even a grand craftsman wouldn't be able to forge a strong weapon from ordinary metals. It wasn't that easy to be stronger than the Huben saber and 100 refinements ring pommel saber. In the past, There were also forging masters who had tried to increase the strength of standard weapons. But due to the limitations of ordinary metals, the results were never satisfactory. Gradually, no forging masters were willing to waste their energy on this. To forging masters, only ranked weapons were worth their efforts. Some precious materials could only be used to forge ranked weapons. Standard weapons had reached their limit, and there was nothing left to develop. Great Divine Constable Sun, let's go take a look. Let's see what sort of trash these fellows have forged. Joshu jumped up from the bed and walked outside. Sun Gongping frowned. It was already the 9th day. He didn't understand how Joshu, who had already slept for around 3 days, had the confidence to win. There was only 1 day left. Could he really create a new standard weapon? How could creating a weapon be so easy? Seeing that Joshu had already walked out, Sun Gongping frowned and hurriedly followed. Look, they're really going to forge weapons. What do you say we do now? Sun Gongping pointed at the forging apprentices. We will lose a lot of face this time. After all this fuss, you're just afraid of losing face? This has nothing to do with you. You won't lose face even if I lose, Joshu said. Moreover, if they want to beat me with this kind of trash, they're underestimating me. What do you mean? Sun Gongping asked in confusion. It means that I'm getting to work. Joshu shrugged his shoulders and grabbed a hammer. It's time to show them what real skills are. You mean? Sun Gongping said in disbelief. Great Divine Constable Sun, are you ready to witness a miracle? Joshu swung his arm, and the hammer flew through the air in a profound arc. Before landing heavily on the anvil, sparks flew in all directions, and a crisp clang rang out. Chapter 33, Standard Weapons Have Reached Their Limit. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Old Joe, they've really succeeded. The forging apprentices under Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the other superintendents cheered. Sun Gongping glanced at Joshu still swinging his hammer and couldn't help shouting. It was as if Joshu did not hear his voice. His expression was calm and collected, and his hammering was rhythmic and orderly. Ding ding dang dang. The crisp sound of hammering echoed in the courtyard. The forging apprentices all looked at Joshu with pity. We've all cheated. How can you win? Creak. The door to the courtyard opened, and Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the other workshop superintendents filed in. The moment they entered the door, they looked at the forging apprentices. When they saw the weapons the forging apprentices had successfully forged, the corners of everyone's mouths curled up slightly. When they saw that Joshu was still forging, they smiled even more happily. The time is up. Superintendent Zhou hasn't finished forging yet. This competition cut the crap? Zhu Chuanfeng isn't here yet. Are you the judge? Sun Gongping interrupted angrily. Xiao Zongshui's expression froze, and he swallowed the words about to come out of his mouth while his face turned red. If not for the fact that he was afraid of Sun Gongping's identity, he really wanted to scold his 18 generations of ancestors. Grandmaster Zhu will be here soon. So what if we wait a while longer? Li Hongyuan sneered. The result is obvious. All the superintendents burst into laughter. They were already calculating how they should split the benefits after obtaining the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. The number of cavalry in the Great Xia's County Protector Army exceeded 10,000. Including the potentially damaged weapons, they would require no less than 10,000 100 refinements ring pommel sabers each year. 100 refinements ring pommel sabers were even more expensive than Huben sabers. In a year, each of them would be able to get at least a few thousand taels of silver. The superintendents were overjoyed. Some of them were even considering whether they should look for another mistress. Sun Gongping was so angry that he was about to explode. The competition wasn't even over, but these guys already thought that they had won? I'll put them in a sack and beat them up. Ding dang! Joshu hammered down and then swung the hammer out gracefully. The hammer fell, and he flicked his wrist. Before anyone could see clearly, he had already stabbed the weapon in his hand into the tank of cold oil he had prepared. Whoosh! There was an ear-piercing sound, followed by the fragrance of hot oil. Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the others looked at one another. For some reason, they had a bad feeling. Could Joshu have really forged a new standard weapon again? How was this possible? Grand Craftsman Zhu Chuanfeng had said that standard weapons were almost developed to perfection. Even they could only add in some things here and there. Unless they used even more precious materials, standard weapons had reached their limit. Even if this kid surnamed Joe had some talent, it was already a blessing for him to be able to develop the Hoben saber and 100 refinements ring pommel saber. It was impossible for him to forge a better standard weapon. And this time, they had paid a huge price to obtain a secret forging formula. Although the power of the weapon was not comparable to that of the Hoben saber and 100 refinements ring pommel saber, it was still stronger than ordinary standard long sabers. Unless Zhou Shu created a new weapon that was no weaker than the Hoben saber and the 100 refinements ring pommel saber, he would never win. Don't worry. Standard weapons made of ordinary metals have reached their limit. Zhou Shu can't possibly beat us. Xiao Zongshui whispered. Grandmaster Zhu has arrived. Just as Li Hongyuan and the others nodded, they heard a loud shout from outside the gate. 10 days had passed, and Zhu Chuanfang arrived on time. Time's up. Has everyone finished forging? Bring the items up, Zhu Chuanfang said coldly after taking his seat. Haha, laughter sounded before he could finish his speaking. Accompanying the laughter, a person dressed as a general walked in majestically from outside the gate. I was passing by the forging division and happened to hear that there's a forging competition here. Grandmaster Zhu, do you mind if I come and watch? The general entered with a smile. Zhou Shu raised his head and sized up the general. The general didn't look young. He was at least 50 years old. His sideburns were already gray, and there were signs of age on his forehead. His appearance was ordinary, but his eyes were abnormally bright, and his pupils were deep. He appeared to have experienced many vicissitudes of life. This aura alone made Zhou Shu feel that this person wasn't simple. But the strange thing was that he felt that this general wasn't a powerful martial artist. Instead, he seemed more like an ordinary person. Although Great Xia also had a troop of ordinary people in the country protector army, ordinary only meant that they were not ranked martial artists, not that they were genuinely ordinary people. In fact, the soldiers of the country protector army also knew how to cultivate martial arts. It was just that, due to their limited aptitudes, they didn't become ranked martial artists. Compared to ordinary people, they were still much stronger. For example, Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and others, as well as Cheng Wanli before he entered the ranks. Although they were not ranked martial artists, they were definitely not weak. But the general in front of Zhou Shu didn't seem to have any martial cultivation at all. While Zhou Shu was deep in thought, Zhu Chuanfang stood up and cupped his hands respectfully. Great General, I didn't expect you to come. I apologize for not welcoming you. Zhu Chuanfang's tone was very polite, with a trace of reverence. Xiao Zongshui and the others stood up as well, not daring to utter a single word. Even Sun Gongping, who was never serious, stood there obediently without interrupting. Zhou Shu was a little surprised. It seemed that this old general had an extraordinary status. Great General, since you have such an interest, I naturally have no objections. Great General, please have a seat, Zhu Chuanfang said. The old general smiled as his gaze fell on Zhou Shu. You must be Superintendent Zhou, the person who developed the 100 refinements ring pommel saber, right? You're indeed a promising youth. Zhou Shu didn't expect the general to speak to him. He said in surprise, Old General, you flatter me. The old general's words made Xiao Zongshui and the others look at each other. Their hearts thumped. Can anyone tell us what is going on? Why would Great General Meng come? He even said that Zhou Shu was young and promising. If we beat him later, wouldn't we be slapping Great General Meng's face? All the superintendents felt bitter in their hearts. First, it was the Grand Minister, and now it was Great General Meng. Did these important figures have nothing better to do? Why did everyone pay attention to such a small matter? Normally, even superintendents of workshops were not qualified to see them. Originally, Her Highness the Princess invited me to come to the forging division to take a look at the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. In the end, Her Highness received an imperial decree to handle some errands. I was also busy with mundane matters and only had the time to come today. But coincidentally, I ran into such a wonderful situation. How many years has it been since a new standard weapon has appeared in the forging division? Superintendent Zhou is impressive. The Hoben saber and the 100 refinements ring pommel saber are both very good. I heard that the competition today is to see who can forge a new standard weapon. If another good weapon can be produced, it will be a great thing for the 3 military forces of Great Xia. Meng Bai explained to everyone why he came with a smile. But his words also indicated that he understood. this competition very well. It's just a small competition between forging apprentices. I didn't expect it to alarm you, Great General Meng. Zhu Chuanfeng smiled. The standard weapons of Great Xia have been developed to almost perfection. Ordinary metals can no longer be forged into better standard weapons. Zhou is indeed talented enough to forge the Heben saber and the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. However, if he wants to have greater achievements, Zhu Chuanfeng shook his head. Great General, it's best if you don't have any expectations for standard weapons. In the forging Dao, ranked weapons are the true Dao. No matter how good a standard weapon is, it's still nothing more than scrap metal when compared to ranked weapons. Grandmaster Zhu, you are an expert in the forging Dao. Meng Bai's smile didn't change. Ranked weapons are naturally the country's most important weapons, but standard weapons are also the country's cornerstone. I think the Heben saber and the 100 refinements ring pommel saber are pretty good, especially the 100 refinements ring pommel saber. If the cavalry of the country protector army can be equipped with it, it won't be a problem for their strength to increase by another 10%. Sun Gongping nudged Zhou with his shoulder, his face filled with joy. He used his eyes to transmit the message. Did you hear that? After Grand General Meng said that, it doesn't matter if you lose this competition. No one will question your contributions? Zhou replied with his eyes. Me, lose? Great General, your words are reasonable. What I mean is that you shouldn't have any expectations for this competition, Zhu Chuanfeng said. It's normal for youngsters to have flashes of inspiration and obtain insignificant results in the forging Dao. However, whether or not they can become forging masters is hard to say. Which forging master isn't a stunningly talented genius? Meng Bai smiled non-committally. Let's take a look and see if these young men can give the arsenal of Great Xia some more brilliance. Zhu Chuanfeng nodded. Bring all your weapons up. When the forging apprentices heard this, they all nervously brought their forged weapons up to Meng Bai and Zhu Chuanfeng. To them, workshop superintendents were already great figures. They had never thought that they would be able to stand in front of a great general and a grand craftsman. When Meng Bai saw the weapons the forging apprentices handed over, his brows furrowed imperceptibly. Although his movement was slight, Xiao Zongshui and the others had been paying attention to him and still noticed it. Their hearts instantly rose nervously. Grand General, Superintendent Zhou is a famous genius. Forging apprentices like us naturally can't compare to him. That's why everyone. Meng Bai waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything. The dozen or so apprentices handed over identical weapons. It was obvious that they had forged them together. In a short 10 days, you were able to modify and obtain a new standard weapon. The forging division is truly filled with talents, Meng Bai said with a half-smile, immediately pointing out that the weapons they forged weren't truly new but rather a modified version of existing weapons. This could be considered a trick. It could truly be called a new weapon. Superintendent Zhou, what about yours? Meng Bai looked at Zhou, his eyes filled with anticipation. Chapter 34, 100 Refinements Steel, Horse-Slaying Saber Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Old Zhou. Sun Gongping tugged at his sleeve and whispered because Zhou was still in a daze. Zhou returned to his senses and glanced at Zhu Chuanfeng. Grandmaster Zhu, you are a grand craftsman, so it's normal for you to look down on standard weapons. But if you want to say that standard weapons have reached their limit, then I beg to differ. As far as I know, although Great Xia standard weapons are strong, they are of a single type. The standard long saber, standard long sword, and even the bow are all of the same types. While it is easier to forge these standard weapons, it is a loss for the military. In my opinion, different military types should be equipped with different weapons. Cavalry have the weapons of cavalry, and infantry have the weapons of infantry. The weapons of the Imperial Guards and the Border Guards are different. Meng Bai nodded slightly, his eyes flashing with praise. Zhu Chuanfeng snorted. You ignorant brat, what do you know about the military? Cut the crap. Did you forge a weapon or not? If not, just admit defeat. Zhou didn't know if he was imagining things, but he had a feeling that Zhu Chuanfeng was targeting him. But thinking about it, he was just a small forging apprentice. He hadn't had any interaction with Zhu Chuanfeng, a grand craftsman, so there was no reason for Zhu Chuanfeng to go against him deliberately. Without much thought, Zhou Shu raised his head and pulled out the weapon soaked in cold oil. When the weapon appeared in front of everyone, Meng Bai and Zhu Chuanfang stood up almost at the same time. Zhou Shu was holding a 7-foot-long weapon. The blade was 3 feet long, and the handle was 4 feet long. With just a glance, people could feel the destructive power of this weapon. In this world, including Great Xia and the other countries, there were long standard weapons, but they were usually spears or halberds. Forging masters had tried forging long-handled sabers before, but all aspects were not satisfactory. Zhu Chuanfang was a grand craftsman. Even if he didn't use it, he could tell with a single glance that the saber Zhou Shu had forged was a weapon that had never appeared in the history of Great Xia. He could even determine that the power of this saber was not inferior to that of the 100 Refinements ring pommel saber. Is he really a weapon-forging genius? Zhu Chuanfang frowned. Show it to me, Meng Bai said in a low voice. He had only taken a glance at the weapons forged by the apprentices of Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the other superintendents. He didn't even have the intention of trying them. Catch? Be careful. Zhou Shu casually tossed the long saber over. You. Sun Gongping was shocked, his heart in his throat. If old Zhou injures Great General Meng, the 3 military forces of Great Xia will tear him apart alive. Meng Bai laughed. His long arm reached out to grab the long saber's handle, and then his hand lowered, dispersing his force. Zhou Shu raised an eyebrow. From beginning to end, Meng Bai hadn't used any strength that surpassed that of an ordinary person. What a heavy saber, Meng Bai said. His fingers caressed the blade edge, and then he gripped the handle with both hands and hacked down a few times in the air. The 100 Refinements ring pommel saber is more suitable for cavalry to slash and kill on horseback. This saber is freely usable on horseback, land, and water, Meng Bai said with a grave expression. General, you know your stuff. Zhou Shu gave him a thumbs up. However, there are some shortcomings. The 100 Refinements ring pommel saber weighs 7 to 8 caddies, so it's easier to use. On the other hand, this saber is more than twice as heavy as the 100 Refinements ring pommel saber. It has much higher requirements on the user's strength and stamina, Zhou Shu added. General, may you let me take a look? Zhu Chuanfang said in a low voice. Meng Bai casually handed the long saber over to Zhu Chuanfang and said with a smile, Grand Master. Zhu, please evaluate it. I think that this saber is indeed a new standard weapon. Zhu Chuanfang's expression was solemn. He ran his hands over his saber, and his palms began to emit a faint white light. The biggest problem with forging such a long saber handle with ordinary metals is that the weapon is easily breakable. Furthermore, forging such a long weapon requires extremely high forging skills. Ordinary forging apprentices are unable to forge it. Could Zhou Shu's forging skills already be close to ordinary forging masters? Zhu Chuanfang thought. He raised his head and looked at Zhou Shu. This saber isn't made of ordinary metals. What material did you use? Zhu Chuanfang's tone was interrogative. If precious forging materials were used to forge a standard weapon, the power of the standard weapon would indeed increase significantly. But it would also lose its original intention. Wouldn't it be more powerful to use precious materials to forge ranked weapons? Standard weapons were supposed to be inexpensive and good. They were meant to be cost-effective and value for money. If Zhou Shu had used other materials, then no matter how good this saber was, he would lose this competition. Impressive. Zhou Shu gave Zhu Chuanfang a thumbs up from the bottom of his heart. Although he didn't like Zhu Chuanfang, he had to admit that he was quite capable. With just a touch, he could tell the secret of the saber. The grand craftsman lived up to his reputation. Did you really add other materials? Meng Bai said with a deep voice, his gaze slightly disappointed. If other materials were added, there would be a problem with mass production. If the manufacturing cost was too high, it wouldn't be a standard weapon. If the manufacturing cost of a standard weapon was too high, why wouldn't soldiers be equipped with ranked weapons instead? It's understandable that young people don't want to lose, but cheating, Zhu Chuanfang snorted coldly. Grandmaster Zhu, I won't take the blame for this. Zhou Shu shook his head. This saber is indeed not made from ordinary metals, but if you say I cheated, I won't admit it. Even if I want to cheat, I need to have the conditions to do so. In this place, would any of you have given me the chance to search for other materials? Zhu Chuanfang looked at the two boys he had left to supervise the competition, and they shook their heads. For the past 10 days, they had been monitoring this place, but they hadn't seen Joshu obtain any other materials for forging. Superintendent Joe, what exactly is going on? Meng said with a deep voice. It's actually very simple. Joshu smiled slightly. Grandmaster Zhu can tell that this long saber isn't forged from ordinary metals. That's because I used a new material. This material is called 100 Refinements Steel. 100 Refinements Steel. Meng Bai's thoughts turned. Does it have something to do with the 100 Refinements ring pommel saber? That's a way to see it. Joshu nodded. The so-called 100 Refinements is actually a forging technique. When I was forging the 100 Refinements ring pommel saber, I had a preliminary idea, but it wasn't perfect at the time. During these 10 days, I spent day and night racking my brains and finally perfected the 100 Refinements technique further. As a result, I obtained this 100 Refinements steel. Sun Gongping curled his lips when he heard this. You spent day and night racking your brains? You were obviously sleeping soundly every day and night. But he was also curious. It looks like old Joe is going to win. The so-called 100 Refinements steel sounds very powerful. Could old Joe really be a genius like me? Should I consider letting him forge a ranked weapon for me after he becomes a forging master? Sun Gongping rubbed his chin in thought. Is the 100 Refinements steel you speak of iron that has been processed using the 100 Refinements technique? Zhu Chuanfang was a professional, so when he heard what Joshu said, he roughly understood what was going on. Zhu Chuanfang's eyes flickered as if he was trying to deduce the effects of this method. The others didn't understand what Joshu meant at all. The 100 Refinements technique and 100 Refinements steel were too technical for them. Even the forging apprentices didn't know much. That's right. The 100 Refinements technique is to repeatedly heat iron and forge it with a certain technique. This is to reduce the impurities in the iron. Furthermore, through a special method, the carbon content of the iron will be reduced. By repeating this process, 100 Refinements steel will be obtained. Joshu used his own understanding to explain briefly. As for whether Zhu Chuanfang could understand or not, sorry, but he wouldn't explain the details. This was a secret. 100 Refinements steel wasn't obtained by simply forging repeatedly. It also involved a ratio of iron, carbon, tin, and other substances. If one didn't understand this, it wouldn't be easy to forge 100 Refinements steel. Joshu believed that even a grand craftsman might not be able to find the perfect formula without thousands of attempts. Would the grand craftsman waste so much time on this? Obviously not. This world was different from Joshu's previous world. Many enigmatic materials for forging weapons were far more powerful than 100 Refinements steel. However, these materials were expensive, and only powerful martial artists could afford them. Superintendent Joe, you mean to say that we can use ordinary iron to forge 100 Refinements steel? Meng asked with a deep voice. Something like that, Joshu said. Grand General, you want to ask about the cost of making this saber, right? Meng nodded. And then he heard Joshu say, 100 Refinements steel is expensive mainly due to labor costs. The cost of this saber should be approximately 20 to 30 taels of silver. So cheap. Meng eyes lit up. This is cheap? Joshu felt that his asking price was too low. He had originally thought that since the Huben saber was only 5 taels of silver, the cost of this saber would be at most twice that. Selling for 10 taels of silver was already profitable, let alone 20 to 30 taels. After all, the human cost of production of the forging division was negligible. It's not too bad, Joshu said after some thought. I'll try my best to reduce the cost, and I should be able to supply this saber at this price. Superintendent Joe, you are indeed a pillar of the country. Meng shouted, overjoyed. Grandmaster Zhu, who do you think won this match? Meng looked at Zhu Chuanfang and smiled. The so-called 100 Refinements steel is just him deciding on his own. We'll have to test it out before we know the real details, Zhu Chuanfang said coldly. In this world, things that appear good but are useless are everywhere. Who knows if this saber is really good or not? Grandmaster Zhu, are you saying that I'm blind, or are you saying that you're blind? Meng snorted coldly, and a wave of dignity suddenly appeared. Can't the two of us tell whether a standard weapon is good or bad? What you see may not be true. Zhu Chuanfang's scalp tingled as he steeled his heart and said, even I can't guarantee that I won't make any mistakes. This saber must be tested to determine if it's really good or not. Grand Master Zhu, since you're so interested, I will accompany you until the end, Meng Bai said coldly. Today, I will personally test the saber. Superintendent Zhou, does this saber have a name? He looked at Zhou. Yes. Zhou said with a serious expression, this saber is called horse-slaying saber, also known as Mo saber. Chapter 35, I want practical rewards. Translator, Atlas Studios editor, Atlas Studios horse-slaying. Meng Bai muttered to himself. His hands grasped the 4-foot-long saber handle, and he laughed loudly. What a good name. What a great horse-slaying saber. He took a step forward, gripped the saber with both hands, and struck out like lightning. Meng Bai didn't look young anymore, and there were no traces of martial Dao cultivation on his body. Even when he brandished his blade, Zhou could feel that the strength he used was a bit weaker than that of an ordinary adult male. Crack! There were 2 wooden stakes erected in the courtyard long ago for the competition. They were each covered with a layer of armor. The horse-slaying saber cut through the 2 wooden stakes, and even the 2 layers of armor were cut in half. General, have you recovered? Zhu Chuanfang stood up abruptly, his face filled with shock. Meng Bai shook his head, but a gratified expression appeared on his face. The horse-slaying saber is indeed worthy of its name. Even an ordinary soldier can slay a horse with just a little training. Meng Bai had sustained serious injuries, and his cultivation had long disappeared like smoke. But even though his cultivation was gone, his martial Dao skills were still there. Ordinary people might not be able to cut through 2 wooden stakes as easily as he did with the horse-slaying saber. Nonetheless, the horse-slaying saber's power shouldn't be underestimated. Grand Master Zhu, I have already tried it. Do you still want to try it yourself? Meng Bai looked at Zhu Chuanfeng with a half-smile. Zhu Chuanfeng's face was black and blue. He had already been a bit impulsive previously. If he still didn't know to back off now, then he really would offend Meng Bai. Great General Meng's status in Great Xia was extraordinary. Even though Zhu Chuanfeng was a grand craftsman, if he really offended Meng Bai, the consequences would be unimaginable. There's no need, Zhu Chuanfeng said coldly. With the Great General as a witness, I hereby announce that the winner of this competition is Zhou. As soon as he finished speaking, he cupped his hands toward Meng Bai and then left with the 2 boys in a sorry state. Old Zhou, you won. Sun Gongping explained in excitement. If Meng Bai wasn't here, he would have shouted out loud. Meng Bai looked at Zhou with pleasure and nodded slightly toward him. Then he turned toward Xiao Zongshui and the others, and his expression became a bit cold. All of you are pillars of the forging division. If you can work together to strengthen the weapons of Great Xia, it will be a blessing for Great Xia and its citizens, Meng Bai slowly said. Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the others were drenched in sweat. All of them were dejected as they said, Great General, you are right. If even Zhu Chuanfeng couldn't afford to offend Meng Bai, then how could they, mere superintendents, afford to offend him? I am not the forging division's Grand Minister. If you are willing to listen to my words, then listen. You're on your own. Meng Bai waved his hand. Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the others were even more terrified as they fell to their knees. We will follow your orders, Great General, and will definitely not dare target Superintendent Zhou again in the future. When Meng Bai saw everyone's bodies tremble in fear, a hint of sorrow flashed past his eyes. How can weapons come from effete people? Weapons are like people. Seeing the people in the forging division, it's no wonder that Great Xia's weapons have degraded year after year. The princess shot in the dark and disturbance might really be effective. Meng Bai looked at Zhou. This young man really isn't bad. He has talent and backbone. When he met me, his attitude was neither supercilious nor obsequious. He managed to create 3 standard weapons in succession in such a short period. With such talent, being merely the superintendent of a small workshop is a waste. A thought flashed through Meng Bai's mind, and his face couldn't help revealing a smile. Superintendent Zhou, have you learned the martial Dao? Meng Bai asked with a smile. A trace of doubt flashed through Zhou's heart. Could Meng Bai be an expert and have seen through my cultivation? But it doesn't seem like it. Zhou pondered for a moment before replying, no. As a forging master, how can you not cultivate the martial Dao? Meng Bai smiled like an amiable elder. General, I'm not a forging master. I'm just a forging apprentice, Zhou reminded softly. Meng Bai was stunned. I almost forgot that Zhou is only a forging apprentice. Why do I feel that he is more like a forging master? Sooner or later, you'll become a forging master. Meng smiled. If you don't cultivate the martial Dao, how can you understand the attributes of weapons? Only by being proficient in weapons can you know what a good weapon is. You are good at forging sabers. Let me ask you, if you don't know any saber arts, how can you forge sabers that can unleash the power of saber arts? The sabers I'm forging now seem pretty good too. Huben, 100 refinements ring pommel, and horse slaying. Meng was stunned. What Zhou Shu said is reasonable. I actually have no response. Superintendent Zhou, you are a genius. Your future is not limited to these 3 sabers. What I mean is, if you want to walk further on the path of the forging Dao, then you have to cultivate the martial Dao, and the best is to focus on sabers. Zhou Shu didn't understand what Meng meant and quietly said, but I might have to forge swords in the future. Meng choked on his words and decided to ignore what Zhou Shu said. In the past, you were a forging apprentice. Perhaps you didn't have the conditions to cultivate the martial Dao, but now that you are a superintendent, you can surely squeeze out some time to cultivate the martial Dao. You must want to say that you don't have any martial Dao techniques, right? Seeing Zhou Shu's hesitancy, Meng looked as if he saw through everything. He smiled and continued. This isn't a problem. You've developed the horse-slaying saber, which has extraordinary significance to Great Xia, Meng said seriously. I have decided to report this personally to His Majesty to reward you. Zhou Shu was delighted. Reward me? Will I be rewarded with 10,000 taels of gold? Meng continued. I will definitely convince His Majesty to make an exception and allow you to comprehend the saber intent. Comprehend the saber intent. Zhou Shu was confused. Sun Gongping, on the other hand, had an excited expression on his face as he repeatedly poked Zhou Shu in the back with his fingers. Hurry up and thank the great general. Sun Gongping said in a low voice. Do you know how rare an opportunity it is to comprehend the saber intent? Even for me, having the chance to comprehend it once a year is a blessing. Ordinary people don't even have a chance. Is it that precious? But I don't need it. Zhou Shu thought. I know my own matters. Zhou Shu didn't have much hope for his own aptitude. If he tried to comprehend the saber intent, he probably wouldn't even be able to comprehend a single trace of it. Besides, did he need to comprehend any saber intent? He had the heavenly saber art. As long as he used the 100 refinements ring pommel saber to kill enemies, his heavenly saber art would improve indefinitely. This was the heavenly saber art. Why would he need to learn other saber arts? That, Zhou Shu muttered and tried his best not to sound offensive. I'm not interested in comprehending saber intent. Can you change the reward? You, Sun Gongping, gritted his teeth in hatred. He couldn't get an opportunity to comprehend the saber intent even if he wanted to. This old Zhou? Meng also frowned. You don't want to comprehend the saber intent? Let me tell you. This saber intent was left behind by a senior expert whose saber Dao is immeasurably deep. If you can comprehend a little, it will benefit you endlessly for the rest of your life. Furthermore, let me tell you this. If you want to become a forging master, it is impossible for you not to cultivate the martial Dao. Meng expression was serious, and he said with a sunken voice, Did you see Grand Master Zhu? He has the cultivation of a 5th-rank martial artist. The martial Dao might not be the most important thing for forgers, but without martial Dao cultivation, one's forging Dao will definitely not go far. I have lived for so many years, but I have never seen someone who is not a ranked martial artist become a forging master. Zhu Chuanfeng is actually a 5th-rank martial artist? Zhou Shu was alarmed to hear this. Thankfully, Great General Meng came today. Otherwise, if Grand Master Zhu was really shameless, I would have been in trouble. A 5th-rank martial artist is absolutely not someone I can deal with right now. Having thought of this, Zhou Shu glared at Sun Gongping. This unreliable fellow, if he invited Yinwu over, would there be a need to fear Zhu Chuanfeng? Sun Gongping was confused. Why are you glaring at me? He glared back. Sparks flew between their eyes as they turned their heads away and snorted. Meng didn't notice their small movements. His expression became serious, as if he had made some major decision. No, I can't let a good seedling be held up just like that. Meng said in a low voice. You must cultivate the martial Dao? You must comprehend the saber intent? I still hope to see you become a forging master, a grand craftsman, or even a divine craftsman. The future of Grand Xia's forging division will depend on you." Xiao Zongshui and the others were all dumbfounded. Isn't this a little too much? Zhou is just a young brat. Even if he has some talent, he isn't even a forging master yet. How can he represent the future of the forging division? Him becoming a grand craftsman? Which grand craftsman wasn't talented when they were young? Not to mention a divine craftsman? Zhou was somewhat speechless as well. Is this old man muddled? "Great General, you are too kind," Zhou said. "No," Meng said seriously. "My eyes have never missed anyone, not a single one. I will immediately enter the palace to report to His Majesty and have His Majesty issue a decree to allow you to comprehend the saber intent," Meng said as he walked out, the horse-slaying saber in his hands. "You must comprehend the saber intent. Otherwise, you will be disobeying the decree." Meng Bai's voice sounded from far away. Zhou was dumbfounded. How can he do this? I really don't want to comprehend any useless saber intent. I just want a practical reward. What are you doing? Chapter 36, Great General Meng's Kindness. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Old Zhou, not bad. I couldn't tell that you were so capable. Sun Gongping stepped forward, put his arm around Zhou's shoulders, and praised him after Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the other superintendents left in a sorry state. There's a lot that you can't tell. Zhou shrugged. Although he had gotten the contracts of Zhang Yaibei, Wu Laoliu, and the others, he didn't plan to ask them to come here immediately. It would take a few more days to complete the construction of the 0th workshop. They wouldn't even have a place to stay if they came right away. Most forging apprentices didn't have other residences in the capital city. If they left their original workshops, they could only sleep on the streets. Since this was the case, he might as well let them stay in the workshops for a few more days. After all, Xiao Zongshui and the other superintendents wouldn't dare play any tricks for the time being. Great Divine Constable Sun, what is the background of Great General Meng? Zhou couldn't help asking the question in his heart when only he and Sun Gongping were left. In this world, those who could hold high positions were definitely martial Dao experts. Even Zhu Chuanfang respected General Meng. But Great General Meng seemed like an ordinary person, so it was very strange. It wasn't that ordinary people couldn't become officials. But even if ordinary people became officials, they would think of ways to cultivate the martial Dao. Cultivating the martial Dao wasn't only for battle but also to strengthen one's body and prolong one's life. Ranked martial artists could easily live to 100 years old, but what about ordinary people? Men seldom live to be 70 years old. You don't know. Sun Gongping looked at Zhou in surprise. There's actually someone in Great Xia who doesn't know of Great General Meng. Is it strange? Zhou thought but didn't dare to say so. After all, he was an outsider and wasn't sure if not knowing Great General Meng was normal. You know as well as I do that I've been burying my head in the workshop, forging. I don't know much about what's going on out there, Zhou said in a low voice. Even so, it shouldn't be to the extent where you don't even know Great General Meng, Sun Gongping said. Although he complained, he continued, Great General Meng, Meng Bai, is the commander-in-chief of the 3 military forces of Great Xia, the only god of war in Great Xia. After hearing what Sun Gongping said, Zhou finally realized how powerful that seemingly ordinary old general was. Meng Bai was Great Xia's most talented martial artist and also Great Xia's most talented military general. When he was 30 years old, he was already a second-rank martial artist. Furthermore, he had led troops to defeat enemy armies and saved Great Xia from danger many times. Meng Bai had stayed in the Country Protector Army, the Demon Executing Army, and the Fiend Eradication Army before, and he had climbed up from the bottom step by step to reach the position of Commander-in-Chief. Now, he was the Commander-in-Chief of the 3 military forces of Great Xia and the number 1 person in the military. Even though Zhu Chuanfang was a grand craftsman, he was nothing compared to such a legendary figure. He's a second-rank martial artist, Zhou said. I couldn't tell. He couldn't sense any martial artist aura from Meng Bai's body. Was the difference in cultivation between the two too great, so Zhou couldn't tell? But Zhu Chuanfang was a 5th-rank martial artist, and Zhou could feel the pressuring aura of a martial artist from him. Is it possible that Meng Bai has already returned to his origin state? 10 years ago, during the 10 Nations Martial Arts Tournament, the great general fought against the experts of the 10 nations alone and was severely injured. Sun Gongping said sadly, ever since then, the great general's realm has been constantly dropping. In recent years, he has become an ordinary person. I see. Joshu nodded. This was someone who had done great service to the country, and he wasn't just a martial artist. He was also a great general who led the army. This was why he had his current status. With Great General Meng's evaluation of you, you can do whatever you want in Great Xia in the future. Sun Gongping patted Joshu on the shoulder. In the future, who will dare say that the princess doesn't know how to read people? Even without Great General Meng's evaluation, I'm still me, Joshu said nonchalantly. You, Sun Gongping was speechless. He thought that he was arrogant enough, but he didn't expect Joshu to be even more arrogant than him. Right, old Joe, if His Majesty allows you to comprehend the saber intent, ask if you can bring me in as well. Joshu. As it turned out, when a big shot wanted to do something, the efficiency of the matter was frighteningly high. Otherwise, things could drag on forever. Meng Bai was an out-and-out big shot. In a sense, his authority was even greater than Princess Yanwui's. Before sunset on the same day, the imperial decree was delivered to Joshu. What a scam! This was the first time Joshu received an imperial decree, and it was even a reward. But he wasn't happy at all. Meng Bai really did do something bad out of good intentions. The reward is a chance to comprehend saber intent. Wouldn't it be better if it was gold? If that doesn't work, I will accept jewelry or jade. Don't some people say that in feudal society, the emperor will sometimes reward ministers with palace maids? Which of these rewards isn't better than this lousy opportunity? I don't care about comprehending saber intent at all. Great General Meng even invited an imperial decree. If I don't go, I'll be going against the imperial decree. How about I sell the opportunity to Sun Gongping? After being depressed for a while, Joshu still hadn't decided whether or not to challenge the emperor's dignity. Superintendent Zhou, the great general said that after the decree is passed down, I am to bring you over. The eunuch who came to read the imperial decree to Joshu didn't leave, and his expression was calm as he spoke. Where are we going? Joshu asked casually. To the saber cave to comprehend the saber intent, the eunuch said. The saber cave isn't far from here. The great general said that to allow you to gain some comprehension as soon as possible, I am to send you to the saber cave and supervise you. Unless you comprehend something, you can stay in the saber cave forever. Forever? I can't leave until I comprehend something? Can you first tell me what kind of place the saber cave is? You're not going to let me put on a show of walking on a mountain of knives, are you? Joshu cursed in his heart. Looking at this eunuch's attitude, he won't stop until he brings me to that cave. Meng Bai really wants to turn me into a saber expert? Although he was doing this out of goodwill, Joshu still felt a deep sense of helplessness. But for some reason, his heart felt warm. Eunuch, I have no problem with going to the saber cave, but I have something to do first. Joshu cupped his hands at the eunuch. Sure, we're not in a hurry, the eunuch said. Eunuch, I still need to ask you for a favor. Joshu said. During this period, I've forged a batch of 100 refinements ring pommel saber. I want to give them to Great General Meng first before going to the saber cave. To tell you the truth, I've been stupid since I was young. I don't even know when I'll be able to comprehend saber intent once I go to the saber cave. The earlier these 100 refinements ring pommel sabers are delivered to the hands of the soldiers, the earlier I'll be at ease. Joshu now had a total of 100 refinements ring pommel sabers in his hands. If these sabers were not sent to the military, how could they bring him any benefits? If he didn't make use of this opportunity thanks to General Meng, was he supposed to leave these sabers in the 0th workshop to rot? Superintendent Zhou is indeed a talent who cares about the country. The eunuch was very gratified. Leave this matter to me. I will naturally get someone to deliver these 100 refinements ring pommel sabers to Great General Meng, and I will definitely not let you suffer any loss. Although the Forging Division was also an organization of the Imperial Court, the workshops in the Forging Division had their own operating mechanism. The weapons they forged were for the 3 military forces, which needed to buy the weapons with money. After all, the operations of the Forging Division required a large amount of funds. Thus, even if they were comrades, the 3 military forces of Great Xia couldn't just pick up weapons from the Forging Division. They had to use their own funds to purchase them. Similarly, Joshu didn't have the authority to give away the weapons he forged. Unless he used his own forging materials, the weapons he forged would still have to go through the workshop's official accounts. Another way to see it would be that the workshops of the forging division were like the military factories or state-owned enterprises of Earth in Joshu's previous life. They also had to trade with the military forces. It wasn't as if the forging materials used by the forging division didn't cost money. The materials were also not the personal properties of the workshop superintendents. Thank you, eunuch. Joshu cupped his hands. He didn't care how much money the 100 refinements ring pommel sabers could be exchanged for. After all, he didn't intend to embezzle. To him, the most precious thing was the benefits from the legendary Armament Canon if the 100 refinements ring pommel sabers could complete kills. While speaking, Joshu recalled the military generals who had previously given him gifts. The border army generals should have more opportunities to kill enemies. Should I give the next weapon to the border troops? Superintendent Joe, please. The eunuch was already urging Joshu to leave. At the same time, some of the guards he brought had already lifted the 2 large wooden chests. They would deliver the 100 refinements ring pommel sabers in the chests to Meng. Meng would decide on which troops to assign the sabers to. Joshu didn't care how Meng distributed them. It was fine as long as the 100 refinements ring pommel sabers had the chance to kill. Eunuch, is the saber cave far? Joshu asked while boarding the eunuch's carriage. Not far. Just a few steps away. The eunuch's attitude was extremely polite, and it was unknown if this was because of Meng. Logically, there was no need for him to be this polite toward a mere workshop superintendent. So close? Why haven't I seen it before? Joshu said strangely. The Saber Cave is a forbidden area of the Imperial Court. No one is allowed to enter without His Majesty's permission, the eunuch said. Only young talents like you, Superintendent Joe, have the chance to enter the Saber Cave to comprehend the saber intent. You must treasure this opportunity. Is this opportunity very rare? Joshu asked. Eunuch, can you tell me what's going on with this Saber Cave? This way, I'll be prepared and won't be unable to comprehend anything. There's nothing I can't say. The eunuch's lips curled up. The Saber Cave was left behind by a mysterious Grand Master of the Saber Dao in Great Xia. It contains a high-grade saber intent. If an ordinary martial artist can comprehend a thing or two, it won't be a problem for them to advance into the ranks. General Cheng Wanli benefited from it. Joshu didn't know why, but the more he listened to the eunuch's introduction, the more he felt that this place was somewhat familiar. Could my predecessor have gone there before? Chapter 37, A Martial Dao Genius Stifled by Forging Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Joshu suspected that his predecessor had been to the Saber Cave, but after thinking about it, it seemed unlikely. His predecessor was just a small forging apprentice of the forging division. The Saber Cave was a restricted area of Great Xia. Based on what this eunuch had said, those who weren't elites wouldn't even have a chance to enter. No matter how Joshu thought about it, it was impossible for his predecessor to have the chance to go. My predecessor has never been there, so where does this damn sense of familiarity come from? In less than 15 minutes, the carriage stopped. So close. Joshu was surprised. He contemplated for a moment. We've been on the carriage for 15 minutes, so we should have just entered the city. Is the Saber Cave here? Superintendent Joe, please. The eunuch got off the carriage first. Joshu didn't hesitate and jumped off the carriage. Here. Joshu's eyes widened. The Saber Cave is in this underground secret chamber. The eunuch didn't notice Joshu's reaction and introduced, don't look at how ordinary this place is. I can tell you that there is an entire 100-man team of Huben troops stationed here. No one is allowed to approach this place without permission. Otherwise, they will face the fierce attack of the Huben troops. Furthermore, there is a squad from the Fiend Eradication Army on standby. Even if someone is a ranked martial artist, it won't be that easy for them to enter the Saber Cave. Joshu was in a daze and didn't hear what the eunuch said. Like a block of wood, he was led into the underground secret chamber by the eunuch. The secret chamber wasn't big. It was several square meters, and a few people were already here. When they heard Joshu and the eunuch enter, these people only raised their heads and then turned their heads back. They stared at the messy marks on the wall, their faces filled with deep thought. Joshu was a little confused. He scratched his head, not daring to believe what had happened. The eunuch looked at him strangely. Superintendent Zhou, you should stay here and comprehend. His Majesty decrees that you can stay here indefinitely. You can leave whenever you comprehend something. Don't worry about food. Someone will deliver it to you. With that, the eunuch turned and left. Joshu felt a few fiery gazes land on him. When he turned around, he saw the few people who came here before him looking at him enviously. Hello, everyone. Joshu was puzzled, but he still waved his hand and greeted. These people rolled their eyes at him and then turned their heads away. No one bothered with him. They had painstakingly defeated countless people before obtaining the opportunity to enter the Saber Cave to comprehend for a day, yet this pretty boy had no time limit. If not for how precious their time was here, they would definitely give him a good beating. Their thoughts were almost all the same. Joshu didn't know what they were thinking. He scratched his head again, making his hair a mess. Right now, he wanted to rush in front of Meng and loudly tell him that the saber marks on the wall were left by him. Are you serious about wanting me to comprehend the saber marks I slashed? Joshu felt that he had dug a hole and jumped into it. He had even buried himself, but he had nowhere to complain. Meng had good intentions. A forging apprentice who didn't understand the martial Dao couldn't become a forging master. If Joshu was an ordinary forging apprentice, this would definitely be a great opportunity. But he wasn't an ordinary forging apprentice. He was a genius, okay? Even if you beat Joshu to death, he would never have imagined that the saber marks he had casually carved would actually be protected by Great Xia's imperial court like a treasure. This shouldn't be the case. My cultivation base is only slightly stronger than Sun Gongping's. Great Xia even has first-rank experts. With my current strength, why would Great Xia's imperial court care so much? The heavenly saber arts was indeed an extremely impressive technique, but Joshu knew very well that his attainments in it were only at the elementary level. What Joshu didn't know was that Great Xia's imperial court didn't value the saber marks he had left behind because of how powerful the saber intent contained within them was. On the contrary, it was because the saber intent was only at the elementary level. If the saber intent was too powerful, ordinary martial artists wouldn't be able to comprehend it. It was precisely because this saber intent, which looked like it had been left behind by a martial artist who had just crossed the threshold, could be comprehended by even unranked martial artists. It wasn't easy to leave such marks. If an expert came to leave saber marks, the saber intent might very well be too strong. It was impossible for someone who had just crossed the threshold and grasped saber intent to leave these marks. This was why Meng and the others thought that these saber marks were deliberately left behind by a saber Dao Grandmaster to help the young martial artists of Great Xia cultivate. Joshu hadn't thought of these twists and turns. He was thinking, what should I do now? Go out now and tell them that I comprehended saber intent? Wouldn't that be too shocking? What if they treat me like a martial Dao genius stifled by forging? Meng wouldn't forcefully cultivate me as a martial Dao genius, right? I don't want to give up on forging. This is my foundation. Why don't I stay here for a few days before leaving? Being too outstanding is also troublesome. Joshu sighed to himself. He watched the people in the secret chamber sitting cross-legged in front of the wall, their fingers constantly pointing and imitating the saber marks on the wall. Joshu imitated them and walked over to an empty wall. He sat down and prepared to put on an act. Just as he sat down, he suddenly froze. Immediately, a sharp aura emanated from his body. In an instant, his entire person seemed to have become a saber, revealing his power. Everyone's attention was drawn to him. What's going on? He has comprehended saber intent. Everyone was going crazy. This pretty boy just came in not long ago, right? How did he comprehend it? The crowd exchanged glances with one another. They had been here for almost an entire day. Even though they had learned something, they had yet to comprehend saber intent. 7.5 minutes, one of them whispered. It's only been 7.5 minutes since he came in. Before this, the one who comprehended saber intent the fastest was Sun Gongping from the Divine Constable Bureau. He spent half an hour. Furthermore, the saber intent he comprehended doesn't seem to be as strong as that of this person before us. Everyone gasped. The Divine Constable Bureau's Sun Gongping was a famous genius among the younger generation. Who was this young man? He was stronger than Sun Gongping? Joshu was a little dumbfounded. He hadn't expected this. He wanted to keep a low profile? What the heck is going on? Joshu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he sat down, he suddenly saw a line. The profoundness of the heavenly saber arts has improved by 2 years because the 100 refinements ring pommel saber you forged effectively completed a kill. The sudden increase in the profoundness of the heavenly saber arts caused Joshu to lose control momentarily, and his saber intent leaked out. It might have been better if they were outdoors. But in this small secret chamber, everyone was focused on comprehending saber intent. They could sense even the slightest saber intent. There was no way to hide it now. Joshu sighed in his heart. He was glad that the dragon elephant prajna technique focused on cultivating the body. Even an ordinary martial artist much stronger than him wouldn't be able to see through him easily. Otherwise, he would have no trump cards left. Being in a world full of dangers, Joshu always believed that if he wanted to live for a long time, he had to keep some trump cards that others didn't know about. This was the only way. If someone wanted to deal with him, his chances of survival would be much greater if this person didn't know his trump cards. Now that his saber intent had been exposed, unless he was willing to silence everyone in the secret chamber, he couldn't hide it anymore. The problem was that even if he wanted to silence them, he couldn't do it. It was easy to kill these people, but there was still the 100-man team of Huven troops outside, as well as the squad from the Fiend Eradication Army. They were not people he could deal with at the moment. Brothers, please continue. I'll take my leave first. Joshu cupped his hands at these people who had yet to recover from their shock. Before they could react, Joshu had already left the secret chamber. Who in the world is he? Why did he come in? Did he come in just to sit for a while and then leave? Did he come here for a tour? He has comprehended saber intent. The secret chamber immediately became deathly silent. Joshu pushed open the tunnel door and climbed up. Just as he revealed his head, he felt several gazes land on him. Although the Huven troops were hiding in unknown places, it was obvious that they were paying attention to this place. Why did you come back up? Qingdian had just stepped onto the carriage and was about to return to the palace to report when he turned around and saw Joshu emerge from the underground secret chamber. I haven't even left, yet this kid wants to sneak away? Does he really want me to stay here and keep an eye on him? Head eunuch Qingdian was already somewhat unhappy. It was no wonder that Great General Meng had specially instructed him to send Joshu to the Saber Cave. This Superintendent Zhou, this is a dream opportunity for others, but he doesn't take it seriously. Does he hate the Martial Dao that much? Superintendent Zhou, this is His Majesty's decree. If you haven't comprehended saber intent, you are not allowed to leave the Saber Cave, Qingdian said unhappily. To disobey the decree is a severe crime. I didn't disobey. Joshu jumped out of the tunnel. You're still denying it. Qingdian originally had a good impression of Joshu, but now, he felt that Joshu might just appear good on the surface. Before he could finish speaking, he saw Joshu take a step forward. The aura around him changed, as if he had become a saber revealing his power. Qingdian's pupils suddenly contracted. I've already comprehended saber intent, and I've also comprehended a saber art. Before Joshu could finish speaking, he felt a gust of wind blow past his eyes. Head eunuch Qingdian had already turned into a blur and disappeared into the distance. Joshu was dumbfounded. This is an expert. This speed should have reached 200 kilometers per hour. Eunuchs have been experts since ancient times. This is indeed not a lie. Joshu praised in his heart. He looked around, and his gaze landed on Qingdian's carriage. Big Brother Coachman, please send me back to the Forging Division. Chapter 38, Geniuses Don't Need Reasonability. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Great Xia's Imperial Palace. In the Imperial Study, Emperor Yuanfeng and Great General Meng Bai stood up abruptly and simultaneously looked at Qingdian. Being glared at by the two most powerful people in Great Xia, even head eunuch Qingdian, who had rushed here, couldn't help taking half a step back. Great companion, are you serious? Emperor Yuanfeng asked with a deep voice. Your Majesty, I have followed you for 50 years. When have I ever lied? Qingdian smiled bitterly. Joshu has indeed comprehended saber intent in less than 7.5 minutes. If I had not seen it with my own eyes, I would not have believed it either. Emperor Yuanfeng looked at Meng Bai and asked, Great General, Is it possible for someone who has never practiced the martial Dao to comprehend saber intent in such a short time? Although he was also a first rank, he was only a false first rank. In terms of the understanding of the martial Dao, he was far inferior to Meng, who was once a second-rank martial artist. Meng Bai's cultivation came from cultivating step by step. "THS isn't impossible," Meng Bai said after a moment of thought. "I've even heard of someone with extraordinary talent. As soon as he came into contact with the martial Dao, he advanced to a ranked martial artist on the same day. From the looks of it now, Joshu does indeed have some talent in the saber Dao," Meng Bai said. "No wonder he can forge weapons like the Huben saber, 100 refinements ring pommel saber, and horse-slaying saber. If you have no knowledge of sabers, how can you forge sabers?" "Great General, your eyes are as sharp as ever." Emperor Yuan chuckled. "It seems that Joshu is truly a genius." Emperor Yuan Feng wasn't as shocked as head eunuch He Qingdian. As the Emperor of Great Xia, he had seen countless geniuses. At least for now, Joshu wasn't the most talented. "Your Majesty, I have a presumptuous request." Meng Bai's expression was serious as he cupped his hands. "There is no need for you to treat me like an outsider." Emperor Yuan Feng shook his head with a smile. "Great General, if there is anything you wish to say, feel free to speak." "Your Majesty, let's not talk about the Huben saber and the 100 refinements ring pommel saber for now. I brought this horse-slaying saber from Joshu. According to the imperial court's rules, developing the horse-slaying saber is a great contribution. Originally, I thought that Superintendent Joshu didn't cultivate the martial Dao, so I shamelessly asked Your Majesty for a chance for him to comprehend the Dao in the saber cave. This could be considered a reward for developing the horse-slaying saber. But from the looks of it, Joshu has an innate sensitivity towards saber techniques. Even if he didn't enter the saber cave, he still might be able to comprehend it himself in the future. This way, I have taken great advantage of him," Meng Bai said with a bitter smile. Ever since the imperial court took over the saber cave, Emperor Yuan Feng had set a rule that no one was allowed to enter the saber cave unless they had contributed greatly to Great Xia. Thus, allowing Joshu to enter was truly a reward. But now, Meng Bai felt like this reward was a bit too small and incompatible with the great accomplishment of developing the horse-slaying saber. "I understand your intentions, Great General." Emperor Yuan Feng nodded. "My Great Xia has never mistreated those who have accomplished meritorious deeds." "I also think so, so I wish to earnestly ask Your Majesty," Meng Bai said. "Seriously. Your Majesty, please allow Joshu to participate in Great Xia's military parade." Emperor Yuan Feng couldn't help laughing. "Great General, have you forgotten that the workshop superintendents of the forging division are qualified to observe the military parade?" "Your Majesty, that's not what I meant." Meng Bai shook his head. Emperor Yuan Feng was startled. "Great General, you mean?" Meng Bai nodded. "Exactly. Although he is talented, he is still only a forging apprentice. Those who are not forging masters cannot participate in Great Xia's military parade. This has been the rule for thousands of years." Emperor Yuan Feng frowned. "I know, Your Majesty. Great Xia's military parade is still 10 months away. After 10 months, Joshu might advance to forging master," Meng Bai said with a sunken voice. "But there is a greater possibility that he will still be a forging apprentice." Emperor Yuan Feng's expression was solemn. "Great General, the military parade is not child's play. The participants have to be announced to the public in advance. If he cannot advance to a forging master by then, we will become a laughing stock." "Your Majesty, I have a hunch," Meng Bai said. "Joshu's ability might not be limited to what we see. I'm willing to take a gamble. I'll bet that he can become a forging master within 10 months. If not, I will bear all the responsibility alone. I will be the laughing stock of the world." Emperor Yuan Feng looked at Meng Bai. The expression on Meng Bai's face was extremely resolute. Having had a sovereign and minister relationship for several decades, Emperor Yuan Feng understood Meng Bai extremely well. He sighed. "Great General, you are disregarding personal honor and disgrace for the sake of Great Xia. Forget it. As the master of Great Xia, how can I let you bear this infamy? If Joshu is unable to advance to forging master within 10 months, then the infamy of having bad perception and cronyism will fall on my head." "Your Majesty," Meng Bai was moved. Just as he was about to say something, Emperor Yuan Feng already waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything. Great General, I will make arrangements for this matter. The most important thing for you now is the borders. Emperor Yuan Fang said with a serious expression. The barbarians are invading, and the border army has already lost several times in succession. Apart from you, I truly cannot think of anyone else who can turn the tide. I will not shirk my duty. Meng said in a deep voice and then straightened his back, cupped his hands, and bowed. Right now, he was no longer a vassal but a general. I will bring this batch of 100 refinements ring pommel sabers to the front lines. In addition, I want to bring another batch of horse-slaying sabers. Meng pointed at the 100 refinements ring pommel sabers forged by Joshu that he Qingdian had brought back. Great General, ask for the sabers from the forging division. From now on, all the workshops in the forging division will prioritize providing what you need. I accept the order. Meng knelt on one knee, gave a military salute, then stood up and left the palace in an imposing manner. On the other side, after he Qingdian left, Joshu wanted to hitch a ride back to the 0th workshop. But the coachman rolled his eyes at him and drove off. He had no choice but to walk back. He's kicking me to the curb after I've outlived my usefulness. Joshu cursed in his heart. Before leaving the courtyard where the saber cave was located, he subconsciously turned his head to take a look, only to see a figure on the roof slowly returning a saber to its sheath. This saber was 100 refinements ring pommel saber? Joshu finally understood why his heavenly saber arts had suddenly progressed and his saber intent had burst forth. It turned out that someone wanted to break into the saber cave and was killed by the guards here, who knew where this person came from, but the 100 refinements ring pommel saber had fallen into his hands. If Joshu didn't remember wrongly, other than the batch of 100 refinements ring pommel saber that he Qingdian had taken away today, he had only given Yinwei one before. The 100 refinements ring pommel saber in this person's hand was definitely the one he had given to Yinwei. Joshu glanced at this person, and this person happened to look over as well. Their gazes met, and then this person jumped off the roof and disappeared into the darkness. I'll remember you. I'll beat you up sooner or later. Joshu added another name to his little notebook. If this person hadn't suddenly killed someone, his identity as a martial Dao genius wouldn't have been exposed. The saber cave wasn't far from the 0th workshop. Even if Joshu couldn't fly like he Qingdian, he still managed to return to the workshop an hour later. The main construction of the 0th workshop had basically been completed. All that was left was the interior renovation. Under the influence of Joshu's money, the construction workers of the Ministry of Works were extremely efficient. Speaking of which, this world was different from his previous life. Even ordinary people here had physical fitness that was actually stronger than that of ordinary people in his previous life. Building a house was basically physical work. Disregarding costs, their speed was naturally fast. Although they couldn't compare to the infrastructure demons in his previous life, Joshu was already very satisfied with the results achieved in less than a month. I can get Zhang Yaibei and the rest to move in later. This is a natural renovation, so I don't have to worry about formaldehyde. Looking at his own territory, Joshu felt a sense of accomplishment. From being a forging apprentice who had nothing when he first came to this world, he had now become the superintendent of a workshop. He also had his own territory. He was already very satisfied with the results he had achieved in such a short period. In his previous life, Joshu was just an ordinary corporate slave. He had never thought of fighting for hegemony immediately after transmigrating. It was quite good now that he was slowly developing. Superintendent Joe, do you see any problems with the job? If you see any problems, just tell me. I'll get someone to fix it immediately. An old man approached Joshu with a smile. It's pretty good. There are no problems. Joshu looked around and said to the foreman, I think we should dig another drainage ditch here and direct the well water into the work shed. The foreman noted down Joshu's opinions one by one. If the customer had any requests, he naturally couldn't refuse. These can be resolved in a day, the foreman said. Superintendent Joe, our bill, no problem. Once the job is done, I will give it to you immediately, Joshu said. This efficiency came from using money. For the sake of this 0th workshop, he had used up all of his savings. But this money was worth it. Joshu was willing to spend as much money as he could to see the 0th workshop built as he imagined. Besides, he had the 100 Refinement's ring pommel saber as a money tree. Furthermore, he would be forging even more weapons in the future. Earning money wasn't difficult for him. Is this the 0th workshop? Is Superintendent Zhou here? A voice suddenly rang out while Zhou Shu was talking to the foreman. The 0th workshop was built to have the appearance of a three-way courtyard house. The first courtyard had a factory and an open area. The second courtyard was the dormitory area where the forging apprentices lived. The third courtyard was Zhou Shu's own residence. He passed through the first yard and opened the main door of the 0th workshop. Outside stood a fully armored soldier. The soldier's face was unfamiliar. Zhou Shu didn't recognize him. He cupped his hands and said politely, "I am Zhou Shu. What can I do for you, General?" On the orders of the great general, within a month, the 0th workshop has to hand over 500 horse-slaying sabers, 1,100 refinements ring pommel sabers, and 3,000 huben sabers. What? Zhou Shu's eyes widened. Are you kidding me? In a month, 500 horse-slaying sabers, 1,100 refinements ring pommel sabers, and 3,000 huben sabers? Why don't you go rob? That's impossible, Zhou Shu said. It's impossible to forge everything within a month. A year is more like it. The great general said that this is an important military matter. If the mission is not completed by the deadline, you will be punished according to military law, the soldier said expressionlessly. General Meng is being unreasonable. How can this be done? Zhou Shu said angrily. The great general said that Superintendent Zhou is a genius. Geniuses don't need reasonability. You will definitely be able to complete the mission. The soldier's tone was calm. The great general said, "Don't you have anything to say?" Zhou Shu said angrily. The great general said that to ensure the completion of the mission, for this entire month, you can use all of the resources from the 37th to the 108th workshops in the forging division. Chapter 39, A Show of Borrowing Power. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The cool soldier left after speaking, leaving Zhou Shu in a mess. It was almost impossible to complete forging 500 horse-slaying sabers, 1,100 refinements ring pommel sabers, and 3,000 huben sabers in a month. Previously, it took 3 months to forge the huben sabers for the huben troops. This was already the result of working tirelessly. If such a thing happened again, the forging apprentices could die from exhaustion at any time. Not to mention, there were also 500 horse-slaying sabers and 1,100 refinements ring pommel sabers. The difficulty of forging the horse-slaying saber and 100 refinements ring pommel saber was even greater than that of the huben saber. All the workshops after the 36th workshop are under my control. But that's still not possible. Zhou Shu felt helpless. Forging weapons was not purely physical work. It was technical work. To forge the huben sabers, Zhou Shu, Zhang Yaibei, and the others had to work together for half a month before they could barely cooperate. This is an important military matter. If I don't complete the mission by the deadline, I will be punished according to military law. If you want to kill me, just say so. Why are you looking for excuses? Zhou Shu was indignant. Meng Bai was giving him an enormous problem. He had already mentioned military law, so Zhou Shu couldn't reject the mission now. I have no freedom, no freedom. Zhou Shu snorted. There was nothing he could do. As long as he was still a member of the forging division, there was no way he could escape this. The forging division was the military's logistics department. Although it was an independent entity in name, Great General Meng was the commander-in-chief of the 3 military forces of Great Xia. He had the right to ask about any matters involving the military. The missions he assigned couldn't be rejected by even the Grand Minister, Yin Wuya. In other words, Zhou Shu had to accept this mission. If he could do it, he had to do it. Even if he couldn't, he still had to do it. Fortunately, Meng Bai gave him an imperial sword and allowed him to use the resources of other workshops. Otherwise, he could just wait for death. It was impossible to complete this mission with just the 0th workshop. It seems like I can only start work early. Zhou Shu sighed and called out to the foreman of the Ministry of Works. I'll add another 500 taels. The construction must be completed within 3 days. In the 97th workshop, Xiao Zongshui was livid. Superintendent Xiao, do you have any other questions? Zhou Shu said with a formal smile. Superintendent Zhou, handing over 1,000 huben sabers in a month is impossible. Xiao Zongshui gritted his teeth. He wanted to curse out loud but ultimately endured it. Xiao Zongshui couldn't disobey Great General Meng Bai's orders, so no matter how aggrieved he felt, he had to endure it. Zhou wasn't only the superintendent of the 0th workshop, but he also represented Great General Meng. Is that so? Zhou restrained his smile. If I remember correctly, the 97th workshop provided 3,000 Huben sabers to the Huben troops in 3 months. In that case, 1,000 Huben sabers in a month shouldn't be a problem for the 97th workshop. It would be a miracle if there were no problems? Aren't you well aware of whether or not the mission can be completed? Xiao Zongshui cursed. In his heart, back then, he had forced Zhou to lead the forging mission of the Huben sabers. Now, Zhou had been promoted, and the other forging apprentices who had participated in forging the Huben sabers had been sent to the other workshops. If Xiao Zongshui had known that this would happen, he wouldn't have split the people out in the first place. Now, retribution had arrived? Xiao Zongshui suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a low voice, Superintendent Zhou, it's not good for you to use your position to get even with me for a private grudge, right? Zhou narrowed his eyes and said coldly, Superintendent Xiao, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want, Zhou said. If you don't want to do it, you can just say so. I'll report it truthfully to Great General Meng. Our forging division has plenty of workshops. Even without the 97th workshop, we can still operate. Xiao Zongshui shivered. The forging division could still operate without the 97th workshop. Then, wouldn't it be even less of a problem if it didn't have him as a superintendent? If Zhou really reported this to Great General Meng, it was hard to say what other things would happen. But as the workshop's superintendent, he would probably be done for. Superintendent Zhou, that's not what I meant. Xiao Zongshui felt a chill run down his spine when he thought about his tragic fate after being dismissed. He lowered his head and said, but this mission is really difficult. Superintendent Zhou, you were from the 97th workshop. Other people might not know what's going on in the workshop, but how can you not know? I can't even hand over 100 Huben sabers in a month, much less 1,000. Xiao Zongshui had a bitter expression. He knew very well that without those who had participated in forging the Huben sabers previously, he wouldn't even be able to hand over a single Huben saber. Superintendent Zhou, can you make an exception? Xiao Zongshui said humbly. Superintendent Xiao, I'm not making things difficult for you. Zhou shook his head. The secret forging formula of the Huben saber is in the hands of the 97th workshop. The Great General asked me to be in charge of the supply of weapons. If I don't look for you, who should I look for? Xiao Zongshui opened his mouth. He really couldn't refute these words. The secret forging formula of the Huben saber was indeed the 97th workshop's, which meant that it was in Xiao Zongshui's hands. When Zhou was still a forging apprentice at the 97th workshop, Xiao Zongshui didn't take him seriously. At that time, he took the forging formula of the Huben saber for himself and went to make a deal with Cheng Wanli. According to the procedures of the forging division, the forging formula of the Huben saber was indeed the 97th workshop's. According to the rules of the forging division, even if the other workshops wanted to forge Huben sabers, they had to obtain the authorization of the 97th workshop and pay a certain fee. To a certain extent, the various workshops of the forging division were independent of each other. Xiao Zongshui wasn't in a position to make known his suffering. He really couldn't say that he could authorize Zhou. The Huben saber was originally developed by Zhou. How could Xiao Zongshui turn the tables and ask Zhou for money? Under other circumstances, Xiao Zongshui was indeed capable of doing so. But now, Zhou was borrowing Great General Meng's power to coordinate all the workshop's resources. If Xiao Zongshui really dared to say this, he would be dismissed from the position of the workshop's superintendent. Superintendent Zhou, can't I return the secret forging formula of the Huben saber to you? Xiao Zongshui said almost pleadingly. What do you mean, Superintendent Xiao? Am I the sort of person who would acquire something by trickery? Zhou said coldly with a stern face. Superintendent Zhou, I really didn't mean that. Xiao Zongshui was miserable. How could he have imagined that he would have to humbly explain himself to a mere forging apprentice one day? Xiao Zongshui gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, Superintendent Zhou, you were the one who developed the Huben saber. The profits from supplying the Huben troops should be yours. I'll get someone to deliver it to you later. Looking at Xiao Zongshui, Zhou suddenly felt dispirited. Back then, he had thought that he would teach Xiao Zongshui a lesson after he made a comeback. But now that Xiao Zongshui was so meek and subservient in front of him, he didn't feel any sense of accomplishment. To put it bluntly, Xiao Zongshui wasn't a big shot. There was no sense of achievement in bullying him. Since Superintendent Xiao has said so, I will reconsider it. Even so, Zhou didn't reject Xiao Zongshui returning the profits from forging the Huben sabers to him. He deserved it, so why not? Many thanks, Superintendent Zhou. Many thanks, Superintendent Zhou. Xiao Zongshui thanked Zhou profusely. Also, Great General Meng's mission has to be completed quickly. My 0th workshop needs manpower, Zhou continued. Superintendent Xiao, help me urge Zhang Yibei and the others to transfer to the 0th workshop as soon as possible. I'll do it right away. Xiao Zongshui had no room to refuse. Xiao Zongshui couldn't afford to offend Zhou now that he had power in his hands. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences if Zhou said anything to the great general. I also need your full cooperation for this mission, Superintendent Xiao. Since you, Superintendent Li Hongyuan, and the others have a good relationship, I'll have to ask you guys to help out this time. Don't worry. After this matter is done, I will definitely report this to the great general and heavily reward you all. What else could Xiao Zongshui say? Zhou was strutting in borrowed plumes, but he was speaking the truth. The great general had indeed allowed him to mobilize the resources of the forging division workshops. No one could refuse. Therefore, even though they knew that Zhou was taking revenge, Xiao Zongshui and the others still had to bear with it. This was a major military matter, so they absolutely didn't dare try and go against Zhou. Superintendent Zhou, we will naturally cooperate fully. But you are an expert and should understand that our workshops don't have the ability to independently forge Huben sabers, 100 refinements ring pommel sabers, and horse-slaying sabers, Xiao Zongshui said bitterly. This isn't something you should worry about. Zhou shook his head. All you need to do is listen to my orders. Listen to my orders. If you can't complete the mission, the responsibility is mine. If you don't listen to me, you will bear the responsibility yourselves if you are unable to complete the mission. Go tell Li Hongyuan and the others that from tomorrow morning on, all of you superintendents will come to my 0th workshop to help out every day. Zhou decided to let these superintendents experience the life of a forging apprentice. Can't forge weapons? It's all right. You know how to serve tea and water, right? If you don't even know this, you know how to sweep the floor, right? In short, all of you will get to experience it properly this month. This is what you get for bullying forging apprentices. Chapter 40. Do you know what labor reform is? Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Zhang Yibei, sixth brother Wu, and the others stood at the entrance of the 0th workshop, feeling a little nervous. Ever since the last meal with Zhou, they had never seen him again. When they returned to the 97th workshop that day, they had been reprimanded by Superintendent Xiao before being assigned to different workshops to lead their usual lives. Every day, they had done nothing apart from work. They didn't even have time to ask about Zhou's situation. Until today, the superintendents sent them to the 0th workshop along with their tattered belongings. There wasn't a single word of explanation throughout the entire process. Brother Zhang, what do you think happened? Sixth brother Wu whispered. The 0th workshop looked clean and sturdy, unlike the other workshops. In everyone's eyes, this place was more like the residence of a rich family than a workshop for forging and working. No one dared push open the main door first. I don't know either. Zhang Yibei was also a little flustered. Although he had more seniority in the forging division, it was only because he had been a forging apprentice for a long time. His knowledge in other aspects wasn't better than that of other forging apprentices. Last time, Brother Zhou said he wanted to take us to the 0th workshop, sixth brother Wu mumbled. Old sixth? You must refer to him as Superintendent Zhou, Zhang Yibei chided. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Zhou appeared inside. Old brother Zhang, old brother Wu, you guys are here. When Zhou saw everyone, a smile appeared on his face. Sorry. I was just handling some matters and didn't notice that you came. Sorry for making you wait. Everyone, come in. This is the 0th workshop. It will be your home from now on. Superintendent Zhou, Have we really been transferred to the 0th workshop? Zhang Yaibei asked nervously. Brother Zhang, didn't I tell you? You don't have to be so polite. Zhou continued to explain, of course it's true. All your contracts have already been transferred to the 0th workshop. From now on, you are all forging apprentices of the 0th workshop. Great. Zhang Yaibei smiled sincerely. Although it was the same no matter where he went, he felt that he could learn more by following Zhou. Even if he was a forging apprentice, couldn't he have some hope in his heart? We will catch up in the future. Now, everyone, follow me. I will show you where you work and where you live. Zhou smiled. There's another reason why you were transferred here in a rush. The 0th workshop received an order from the Imperial Court. We only have a month to hand over a batch of weapons, so we don't have time. After familiarizing yourselves with the environment, we will immediately start work. No problem, we'll listen to you, Superintendent. Zhang Yaibei was the first to speak, and the others all agreed. Following Zhou, they stepped through the door. Once they entered, everyone was stunned. Inside the door, there was a wide open area. Both the length and the width exceeded 30 paces. It was square, and the ground was paved with neat limestone. Around the open area, thick wooden stakes were erected. They were used for testing weapons. Farther ahead of the open area was a large room that no one had ever seen before. The room was so big that it was comparable to a palace's main hall. Everyone thought to themselves that the room would seem empty even with more than 30 people inside. In the enormous room, smelting furnaces were arranged neatly. Each smelting furnace didn't take up much space, but it was enough for one person to use. Zhang Yaibei and the others had once forged weapons together with Zhou. Upon seeing this scene, they immediately understood that this was the place where everyone would forge weapons together. This is where we forge our weapons. I call it the factory. Zhou smiled. Everyone, follow me. The residential area is at the back. He led the way through a doorway to the second entry. When they entered, they found themselves in another large courtyard. Flowers and plants were growing, bringing about a refreshing look. On three sides of the courtyard were two-story buildings, which were different from what Zhang Yaibei and the others had seen before. The green bricks and tiles made Zhang Yaibei and the others feel a bit uneasy. They were afraid that they would dirty something. This is where you will live in the future, Zhou said. Every house has the same specifications. Everyone has one. He randomly opened a door. It's not too big inside, but it should be enough for a family of 3. Zhou called Zhang Yaibei and the others in to take a look. Zhang Yaibei, 6th brother Wu, and the others hesitated for a while before a few of them gathered their courage and walked in. As soon as they entered, they were greeted by the sight of a spacious and bright living room, followed by 2 bedrooms and a bathing room. This was a mansion. Zhang Yaibei's voice trembled as he said, Superintendent Zhou, is this place really for us to live in? He had been a forging apprentice at the forging division for more than 20 years and had worked hard. His only thought was to buy a house that belonged to him in the capital one day. This house in front of him was what he dreamed of. Although he knew that it belonged to the workshop, he was already satisfied to be able to live here. Compared to the pigsty-like residences in the past, this place was like heaven. Of course. Zhou nodded. Not only can you live here, but your family members can move in as well. However, there are some secrets in the forging division. If your family members move in, you have to be careful. This was needless to say. The forging division had always had this rule. The family members of forging apprentices could also live in the workshops, but they had to accept the management of the workshops. Even the dilapidated workshops had a large number of forging apprentices' family members living in them, let alone the environment in front of them. As long as you guys are still at this forging division workshop, you can live here forever, Zhou said with a smile. If any of your family members come over and are willing, they can help do some cleaning and cooking. They can also collect wages. Can I get my wife to come over? A young forging apprentice shouted. Of course. Zhou smiled. This house's soundproofing is all right, but don't delay your work because of this. Everyone burst into laughter. Not only was the young man not embarrassed, but he was also in high spirits. No, my body is fine. Zhou spat. I, the superintendent, am still single. These guys really have no sense. All right, Brother Zhang, please count the number of people and give me a name list. As for the houses, Each of you will have one, according to the number. As for the layout of the rooms, I will leave it to you. I only have one request, and that is to take care of your personal hygiene. There is a place to bathe in each house. Every day after you finish your work, you must bathe when you return home. Also, if anyone dares to urinate and defecate in random places, don't blame me for being heartless. Don't worry, Superintendent. If anyone dares to be sloppy, I, old Zhang, will be the first to kick their balls off. Zhang Yibei said loudly. If anyone dared to destroy such a clean and tidy place, that person would be their enemy? The rest of the people were also shouting. They were now full of anticipation for their future lives. They had originally lived and ate in small work sheds. How could they not cherish it now that they had independent residences? The yard in the back is where I live. If there's nothing, don't go in, Joshu added. Of course, nobody had a problem with this. They had never been allowed to enter the residences of the superintendents without reason. Just as everyone was discussing the division of houses, Xiao Zongshui, Li Hongyuan, and the others arrived at the 0th workshop. Everyone was shocked when they saw the huge factory in the 0th workshop. They were even more shocked when they saw the residential area of the forging apprentices. Putting the smelting furnaces together was one thing, but was there a need to give such luxurious residences to forging apprentices? Isn't it a waste to let forging apprentices live in such a good place? One of the superintendents muttered softly. As long as they have a place to sleep, it's fine. The forging division hired them to work, not to enjoy themselves. Although the superintendent spoke softly, Joshu could still hear him clearly. The other superintendents also looked like they agreed. Joshu laughed coldly in his heart. As expected, they were like the capitalists from his previous life. They thought that apprentices were not hard-working enough. These fellows wished that forging apprentices would work for them without eating, drinking, or sleeping. Fine, I'll let you have a taste of it. Maybe you should learn about labor reform? Superintendents, since you have already learned about the mission, I won't elaborate further. Joshu said. Time is of the essence for this mission. The mission is extremely important and requires everyone to work together to complete it. If anyone has any questions, it's best to raise them now. If you make any excuses during the mission, don't blame me for disregarding our relations. Joshu's voice turned cold, and his gaze turned sharp as he stared at Xiao Zongshui and the others. Xiao Zongshui and the others felt their hair stand on end. They actually felt as if they were facing some big shot. Since no one has any problems, if anyone dares to quit later and delay the progress of the mission, don't blame me for not speaking up for you when Great General Meng blames you. I can consider our relations, but the military law will not. The superintendents felt a chill in their hearts. Military law did not allow mercy. If that really happened, none of them could bear the responsibility. Don't worry, Superintendent Zhou. We will definitely cooperate fully. Xiao Zongshui and the others cupped their hands in unison. Very well. I know you are all sensible people. Joshu laughed, revealing his white teeth. After this matter is done, I will definitely report your contributions to the Great General truthfully. For some reason, when Xiao Zongshui and the others saw Joshu's smile, they felt a little scared. Now, I'll distribute the tasks that everyone has to be responsible for. Joshu looked at Xiao Zongshui and the others. I hope that everyone will temporarily forget your positions as superintendents. Do your job well and start anew.